So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are getting into something that is, well, it's honestly pretty heavy, but incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. It's one of those texts that kind of forces you to rethink things.
Right. We're looking at a text from 1871 that basically proposes this wild, radical formula. It argues that human thought isn't just, a passive reflection of reality.
Hmm.
It's a literal physical force, like as real and potentially as destructive as uncontained steam.
Which is a crazy concept to wrap your head around, honestly.
Exactly. So we're opening up the pages of Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, specifically focusing on chapter 1, which is called The Apprentice.
Right, The Apprentice.
And I think we need to be really clear right out of the gate here. We are treating this text today strictly as an analytical blueprint.
Yeah, that's a really important disclaimer.
Because Pike is a deeply controversial historical figure, and our mission on this deep dive is absolutely not to endorse the man himself or, his broader political worldview.
Right, we have to separate the mechanics of the philosophy from the surrounding noise.
Exactly. We're just trying to extract and critically examine the philosophical architecture he lays out regarding human nature. We want to explore the raw materials of existence.
Force, thought, discipline.
Yeah, those exact things. And uncover the rigorous transformations this text claims are required to actually shape those volatile materials into something lasting and just.
And that framing is so essential for you listening right now. Because when you approach a dense historical text like this, you really have to look for the machinery underneath.
Right.
Because this chapter 1, it operates as this fiercely practical manual for both personal and societal construction.
It really does. It's not just abstract theory.
No, not at all. It challenges us to look directly at the sheer danger of raw power, the symbolism of the builder's tools, and this lifelong, honestly exhausting journey of refining ourselves.
We're finding ourselves from that state of rough, unshaped potential into structural integrity.
Exactly. It fundamentally argues that we are all, in the grand scheme of our development, at the apprentice stage.
I mean, I certainly feel like an apprentice most days. So whether you're tuning in to dissect historical philosophy or you're applying this directly to your own psychological development, we have to start where the apprentice starts.
With the raw material itself.
With the raw material. And the very first concept we encounter here is the nature of force. And the terrifying physics of human nature when that force is left entirely unregulated.
Yeah, the text opens with a really stark warning about this.
It does. It basically says that force alone, devoid of a guiding mechanism, is inherently and inevitably destructive.
And if you look at the historical context of when this was written, it really illuminates why Pike chose his specific analogies.
Oh, right. The late 19th century?
Exactly. This was the era of the Industrial Revolution. So humanity was suddenly harnessing these immense, previously unimaginable physical powers.
Steam engines, massive factories.
Yeah, so the text compares unregulated human force to steam without a container, or fire without direction.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about the underlying physics of it.
Right. Energy without a vessel simply dissipates into the ether, or worse, it destroys the environment around it.
I mean, steam, when it's hermetically contained and mathematically directed through a valve, it can power a locomotive across an entire continent.
Exactly. But steam that is uncontained.
It's just a lethal cloud. It just scalds the engineer and evaporates into nothing.
Spot on. And it's the same with fire. Fire warms the structure, or fire burns the structure to the foundation.
So the raw energy itself is completely morally neutral.
Completely. The containment, the architecture around the energy, that is the sole determining factor of the outcome.
Okay, so that leads right into the explicit formula the text provides for actual human advancement.
Right, the formula.
Because it states that intellect must act as the guiding compass. Like, thought itself is a force, but progress absolutely requires a direction.
So the philosophical equation here becomes force plus intellect plus moral law equals real advancement.
Force, intellect, moral law.
Yeah, because unregulated emotion or unregulated societal momentum, without the intellect to guide it and the moral law to contain it,
It's just a bomb going off.
exactly, it's just destruction.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, though, because I want to push back on that.
Sure, go ahead.
History is incredibly messy, right? And sometimes a bomb is exactly what a corrupt system requires.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Like, think about a deeply entrenched tyrannical regime. It seems like a necessary revolution actually requires an explosive, uncontained fire just to shatter the existing walls.
Right.
If you're entirely focused on containment and measurement, don't you lose the raw, explosive passion you need to overthrow actual oppression?
That's a really valid question, but the historical record actually reinforces the text's warning on this exact point.
Really? How so?
Well, the source material explains that while noble causes might possess that incredible, righteous fire of passion,
Which they need.
which they need, yes, but without the balance of intellect and a grounding in moral law, even the most justified movements inevitably collapse into ruin.
Oh, I see.
Consider the French Revolution. That's an event whose philosophical shockwaves heavily influenced the era in which this text was written.
Right, that was the ultimate righteous fire.
Exactly. It began with the righteous fire of overturning a corrupt monarchy, but it lacked the containment of moral law and intellect.
So the result wasn't immediate liberty.
No, the result was the reign of terror. The fire consumed the aristocracy, and then, because it had no container, it immediately turned and consumed the revolutionaries themselves.
Wow. Yeah. The passion gets the movement out the door, but without the compass of intellect and the containment of moral law, the revolutionaries just become the new monsters.
Precisely. The energy has to be converted into something structurally sound.
The text treats this not just as like a political probability, but as a literal law of human physics. Power without wisdom leads to ruin.
It's an absolute rule for Pike.
So, if intellect is the compass that directs our inner fire and moral law is the container for our steam, we need tangible, practical mechanisms to actually apply that direction in reality.
Right, because we can't just conceptualize intellect in a vacuum.
No, we require instruments to utilize it,
Yeah.
which introduces the builder's tools.
Yes, this is where it gets really practical.
This is the moment the philosophy shifts from, abstract thermodynamics to highly tangible psychology. The text introduces two vital symbols for the apprentice, the gavel and the 24-inch rule.
And these are presented as profound psychological metaphors.
Okay, let's break them down for the listener. The gavel represents force. It's the raw, kinetic ability to act, to strike, to shatter, and to shape reality.
Right, and then the 24-inch rule represents order, discipline, and precise measurement.
And the absolute necessity of their pairing is the core lesson here.
Oh, completely. The text dictates that action must be measured, effort must be directed, and power must operate strictly within limits.
Within limits.
Yes. If we explore the cognitive tension between these two tools, we are basically looking at a masterclass in human executive function.
How so?
Well, the gavel, without the rule, is reckless, blind destruction. You're swinging at the stone with immense power, but no blueprint.
You're just breaking things.
Exactly. But the rule without the gavel, that is the paralysis of analysis.
Oh, man, yeah.
That is possessing the perfect theory of how to build a life or a society, but having absolutely zero impact on the world because you refuse to swing the hammer.
Okay, the modern equivalent is having a massive high-performance engine dropped into a chassis that has no steering wheel and no braking system.
That's a great analogy.
The gavel is the horsepower, but the rule is the steering column.
Right.
If you only have the engine, you are going to wrap the vehicle around a tree the second you hit the gas.
You're going to crash immediately.
But if you only have the steering wheel, you're just sitting in a parked car, theorizing about a road trip you are never going to take.
Exactly. The automotive parallel highlights the exact synthesis the text is demanding here. These tools are a mandated pairing for anyone seeking to build something that endures. And what's crucial to understand is the fractal nature of this concept.
Fractal meaning it applies at different scales.
Yes, it applies at the micro level of building a personal habit. It applies to the meso level of structuring a local community. And it applies to the macro level of sustaining an entire civilization.
You inherently need the capacity to act the gavel and the rigorous discipline to measure that action against a standard rule.
You can't have one without the other.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate again.
Sure.
If I have this incredible raw potential, this massive engine of ambition or creativity, doesn't constantly measuring my actions and staying within a strict 24-inch limit fundamentally stifle my potential?
It feels like it would, right?
Yeah. It feels like extreme discipline actually kills greatness. Like the rule is just a leash on the gavel.
Well, that assumes measurement is the opposite of speed or power.
Isn't it?
In reality, no. The text asserts that power must operate within limits, precisely to become powerful.
Oh, interesting.
The rule doesn't stifle the gavel. It ensures the gavel actually achieves its intended purpose, rather than just generating collateral damage.
Okay, I think I need an example of that.
Consider the physics of light.
Okay.
A standard incandescent floodlight is unrestricted. It blasts energy in 360 degrees. It has tremendous freedom, but because it is completely unregulated, it can only illuminate a driveway.
Right. It just scatters everywhere.
Exactly. But a laser is light that has been subjected to extreme restriction.
Oh, wow.
It is forced into a coherent, highly measured, narrow beam. And because of that severe restriction, because of the 24-inch rule applied to the photons, that light can now cut through industrial steel.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it. The limit is the exact mechanism that creates the penetrating power.
Precisely.
So the discipline of the rule actually makes the force of the gavel exponentially more potent.
It does. It isn't about playing small or restricting your ambition. It's about ensuring your strikes actually alter the material in front of you.
Okay, but a master craftsman utilizing a perfectly balanced gavel and a perfectly calibrated rule achieves absolutely nothing if they are striking water.
Right, the tools demand a medium.
They demand material to shape.
And that material, according to the text, is the human soul itself.
Yes. This is where the text frames this entire process as the architecture of the self. It introduces the concept of moving from what it calls the rough ashlar to the perfect ashlar.
Which is such a powerful image.
It really is. And for you listening, if you aren't familiar, an ashlar is simply a block of stone used in the construction of massive buildings.
Right, a masonry term.
The source text utilizes the rough ashlar as the definitive representation of the unrefined human being. This is us in our default, reactive, structurally unsound state.
And the perfect Ashlar represents the disciplined, highly developed individual.
But we need to define what perfect means in this context, right? Because it doesn't mean flawless in a vanity sense.
No, not at all. In masonry, a perfect Ashlar is one that is perfectly squared so that it can bear weight.
That's the key, bearing weight.
Exactly. A round stone or a jagged rough stone creates immense weak points in a wall. The pressure of the building will either crack it or it will cause the stones around it to slip.
So philosophically, an unrefined person cannot bear the heavy weight of societal responsibility.
They'll crumble, or they'll make the people around them crumble.
Wow. So this transformation from rough to perfect, it requires brutal self-reflection.
Intense moral effort.
Yeah, and an agonizing commitment to continuous improvement.
It demands a level of introspection where you have to locate the jagged edges in your own psychology.
Like the reactive anger.
Yes.
Or the unexamined biases.
The fragile ego.
And you have to actively strike them off.
Which is painful. It requires a devastating amount of humility to even step into the quarry and admit you are the rough stone.
Seriously. I think that's the exact reason this chapter is titled The Apprentice.
Because the title itself implies a deficit of knowledge.
It implies the work is nowhere near complete.
Right. And what's paramount to understand here is the highly active nature of this transformation. A stone does not spontaneously polish itself.
Geological time does not square a stone. Time only erodes it.
That's a great point. Only intentional, highly measured strikes of the gavel, strictly guided by the rule, can shape it into something capable of bearing weight.
But here's the thing. We live in a culture deeply impatient with the apprentice phase.
Well, incredibly impatient.
Like for you listening right now, think about how obsessed we all are with the facade of the finished building.
We want the shortcut.
We want the life hack, the instant psychological optimization, the chemical shortcut that turns us into the perfect Ashlar by Friday afternoon.
Yeah, but how does a modern mind, conditioned for immediate gratification, make peace with the slow, tedious, incredibly dusty chipping away that this text actually demands?
Well, I think the philosophy within this text fundamentally rejects the modern concept of a shortcut. It demands continuous moral effort precisely because the effort is the mechanism of change.
It's very stoic in that regard.
It is. The stoic elements of this philosophy dictate that we have to locate our existential satisfaction in the daily discipline itself, not in the fantasy of the finished product.
Right. The fulfillment has to be derived from the physical act of applying the rule and swinging the gavel today.
With the full, sober knowledge that you will have to wake up and do it again tomorrow.
Because the stone is never truly finished, it's only ever becoming more capable of bearing weight.
Yeah, the chipping away isn't the obstacle keeping you from your real life. The chipping away is the actual lived experience.
That's profound. And this internal, highly localized work on our own psychology It doesn't occur in a vacuum.
No, it doesn't.
A collection of individual stones, whether they are rough, jagged, or perfectly squared, ultimately constitutes the larger structure of the civilization we inhabit.
Okay, yes. The text initiates this brilliant philosophical pivot here. It demonstrates that the macrocosm of society is simply a fractal reflection of the individual.
Exactly. The precise transformations required for a single mind apply directly to the governance of a nation.
A chaotic population of rough Ashlars, like millions of individuals operating purely on unregulated force, swinging massive gavels with absolutely no rules.
That's a terrifying image.
It is. But they must somehow be organized into an ordered state where laws accurately reflect the true will of the people.
And the text identifies three massive, load-bearing ideals required to build this societal structure.
Liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Right. And the definitions Pike applies to these concepts are critical. They draw heavily on classical liberalism and Enlightenment thought.
So we have to dissect how the personal tools scale up to the level of the state.
Let's do it. Let's start with liberty.
Yeah.
He defines liberty not as absolute autonomy, but specifically as freedom guided by law.
Freedom guided by law. That is a direct, undeniable rejection of unregulated force.
Completely. Liberty, in this framework, is not the freedom to exercise your will upon the world however you see fit.
Because that is simply steam exploding from a ruptured boiler.
Exactly. True liberty is the freedom to act forcefully within the boundaries of a moral and legal framework that simultaneously protects the liberty of everyone else.
So it's the gavel of the citizen operating strictly within the measurements of the societal 24-inch rule.
That is exactly what it is.
Okay, and equality is similarly redefined, isn't it?
Yes, it's framed as fairness and justice.
Right. It's not an enforcement of equal outcomes or a mandate that everyone possess the exact same material wealth.
No, it's a guarantee that every single citizen is measured by the exact same 24-inch rule.
The same rule for everyone. I love that.
And then fraternity represents our inherent duty and responsibility to each other. It functions as the cultural mortar that binds the individual stones together.
But the text provides a dire warning here.
It does.
It says that without perfect structural balance, these three ideals will cause the entire building to collapse. But looking closely at those three pillars, liberty, equality, and fraternity, I mean, they seem naturally, perhaps violently at odds with each other.
They absolutely are.
Right. Because if a society pushes entirely toward personal liberty, maximizing the freedom of the individual to accumulate wealth and exercise power without restraint, you inevitably generate massive inequality.
And you abandon your fraternity to the vulnerable.
Exactly. But conversely, if a state mandates total mathematical equality, it has to utilize tyrannical authoritarian force to suppress individual excellence.
It has to strip away personal liberty to maintain that flat baseline.
Right. So how do these not just destroy each other?
Well, you've just articulated the central agonizing tension of all political philosophy over the last 3 centuries.
It's the big problem.
It is. And the source text confirms this exact friction. Pike warns that these ideals, left to their own devices, collapse into disorder.
They aren't designed to exist independently as absolute dogmas.
No, they were designed to constantly check and balance each other through dynamic tension.
Okay, dynamic tension.
Yes. If liberty becomes an absolute dogma, fraternity starves. If equality becomes an absolute dogma, liberty is executed.
So they require the societal equivalent of the rule to maintain structural harmony.
Precisely. The law, but more importantly, the internalized moral character of the citizens is the rigorous measurement that prevents these 3 explosive societal forces from obliterating the state.
So engineering a resilient society requires significantly more than just establishing physical institutions, drafting legislation, or monopolizing physical force.
It relies entirely on the invisible underlying psychological drives of the population.
Because you can construct the most elegant constitution in human history. But if the populace consists entirely of rough, unshaped stones, entirely lacking in internal regulation,
The structural integrity of the state is an illusion.
it will inevitably fall.
The physical reality of the state is entirely governed by the internal, unseen reality of the citizens.
And this realization, this transitions us right into one of the most honestly epistemologically radical propositions within the entire text.
The tangible nature of invisible forces.
Yes. The text presents human thought, human will, and even internal concepts like faith, not as passive, subjective experiences floating in a biochemical ether.
No, it presents them as literal forms of force.
Like gravity, like electromagnetism.
It argues that thought actively influences reality, that will is an engine that drives physical action.
And that faith and love are potent, active forces of human existence capable of moving the material world.
It is a profound departure from how a modern, hyper-materialist audience usually categorizes reality.
It really is. We're heavily conditioned to draw a thick, impenetrable line between the mental realm and the physical realm.
But the text obliterates that line. It emphasizes that these unseen elements are highly active engagements with life.
So if we trace the conceptual lineage back to the fire and the steam we analyzed at the very beginning of the deep dive, the text is arguing that your internal will is literally that exact same category of raw physical energy.
Yes, your thoughts are not mere reflections. They are engines generating kinetic potential.
Wow. And this philosophical framework comes to a violent head when the text addresses the struggle between truth and error.
Right, because if human thought is an actual physical force that shapes reality.
Then the ideological battle of ideas is a literal material war.
Exactly. And the text is shockingly realistic about the mechanics of this war.
It doesn't sugarcoat it. It states outright that truth does not win by default.
Error is described as incredibly persistent. It's capable of spreading exponentially and infecting populations with terrifying speed.
But we have to ask why that is. Why does error spread faster than truth?
Well, the text suggests an answer based on what we've already learned. Error does not require a container.
Oh.
Error does not require the rigorous application of the 24-inch rule. Error is unregulated force. It is chaos.
It spreads like a pathogen precisely because it demands absolutely zero discipline or moral effort from the host.
Yes. But truth, however, is a highly complex structure.
It requires immense effort, intellectual courage, and vast amounts of time to establish.
It demands the discipline of the perfect Ashlar.
You know, if we look at this through the lens of thermodynamics,
Okay, let's hear it.
error is essentially entropy.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to phrase it.
Right. In a closed physical system, everything naturally decays from a state of order into a state of disorder. The heat dissipates, the metal rusts, the structure crumbles.
It requires absolutely no effort for a system to degrade.
Exactly. Truth, on the other hand, is anti-entropic.
It requires the constant, exhausting input of metabolic, psychological, and intellectual energy to maintain order.
You have to actively fight the natural decay of the universe to hold a truthful structure together. Error is just the default state of a passive system.
The entropy analogy is perfectly aligned with the epistemology of the text. Truth is a highly active, heavily cultivated anti-entropic state. Error is certainly the passive decay of human intellect.
But that carries a terrifying implication for our daily lives, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because if thought is a literal force that actively shapes our shared reality, and if error spreads effortlessly by default, are we continuously, unintentionally funding error in our own psychology and in our society simply by remaining mentally passive?
That is the big question.
Like if we are just scrolling, absorbing whatever algorithmically generated outrage is placed in front of us and refusing to rigorously curate our own internal landscape.
Are we actively accelerating the entropy of our culture?
Exactly.
Well, the text points a very bright spotlight directly at that danger.
Yeah.
It explicitly mandates that the apprentice must learn to think independently and stand for truth.
Because mental passivity is the exact mechanism that allows societal error to achieve critical mass.
Yes. When an individual refuses to actively apply their will and their intellect to the rigorous pursuit of truth, they become an open conduit for the forces of entropy.
They just let the rest in.
Exactly. The text notes that the apprentice must continue striving, even when misunderstood or marginalized.
Which is hard. Standing for truth is frequently an isolating, incredibly difficult posture to maintain.
It is. But you cannot combat a highly active, rapidly spreading force of error with a weak, passive preference for truth.
You must fight unmeasured force with intensely directed, tightly ruled force.
Thinking independently and absorbing the friction of standing for truth is the baseline defensive posture against intellectual entropy.
But simply playing defense is insufficient.
Right. It's not enough to just sit there and think about it.
Holding a thought in your mind, no matter how true or independent it is, doesn't actually square the stone.
No. To genuinely push back against error and to definitively shape the rough ashlar into something capable of bearing weight, the apprentice must incarnate these abstract thoughts into a physical, lived practice.
Which means philosophy, if it remains purely theoretical, is just the 24-inch rule sitting on a workbench next to a gavel that never swings.
That's beautifully put. The abstract must be transmuted into behavior.
And this forces us to examine the final major architectural theme of the chapter, the lived philosophy and the specific moral duties assigned to the apprentice.
Because the text outlines a classical operating system of virtues here. Justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude.
And superseding all of those, truth, compassion, and a binding duty to others.
So the ultimate mandate delivered to the apprentice is not simply to intellectually agree with these principles.
Not just to listen to historical deep dives about them.
Right, exactly. But to physically execute them in real time.
And if we analyze these specific virtues through the mechanical framework we've built, they cease to be mere moral badges and become functional tools.
Okay, let's do that. Take temperance.
Okay. In the context of an unrefined human being, temperance is frequently misunderstood as mere prudishness or ascetic denial.
Right, just saying no to things.
But structurally, temperance is the 24-inch rule violently applied to your own internal appetites.
Wow. It is the highly measured, intentional limitation of your own biological and psychological force to prevent an explosion.
So temperance is the valve on the steam engine. It regulates the pressure so the boiler doesn't rupture.
Right. And consider fortitude.
What's fortitude in this mechanical sense?
Fortitude is not merely the ability to absorb punishment. It is the psychological stamina required to continuously fight the rapidly spreading entropic error we just analyzed.
It's the endurance required to wake up every single day and pick up the heavy gavel to chip away at the rough ashlar.
Yes, especially when you are exhausted, when the progress is microscopic.
And when the passive decay of the world is begging you to just quit?
Exactly. And justice.
Oh, justice is the macro application of the rule, isn't it?
It is. It is the societal mechanism used to constantly calibrate the lethal tension between liberty and equality we discussed earlier.
Okay, but how does an individual actually execute this?
That's the challenge.
Because it is deeply satisfying to intellectually dissect classical philosophy and recognize the structural elegance of prudence and temperance.
Oh yeah, we can talk about it all day.
But crossing the bridge from theory to reality is where most of us fail.
How do you transition from understanding the definition of these virtues to physically deploying them in a modern world that is overflowing with chaotic, unregulated force?
It's the hardest part.
Like when you are subjected to extreme professional stress or when the political landscape seems to be fracturing, how do you actually reach for the rule and the gavel?
Well, the text provides the ultimate thesis to answer that exact question. Philosophy must become action.
Philosophy must become action.
The bridge between the theoretical blueprint and the physical building is constructed entirely out of microscopic, agonizingly difficult daily choices.
Because the source material reiterates that this growth is a lifelong, unglamorous process.
Yeah. The analytical awareness we have constructed during this discussion is merely the prerequisite.
Awareness is just turning on the floodlights in the quarry so you can finally see how rough the stone actually is.
That's right. But the lights do not cut the stone.
You still have to physically pick up the tools.
The execution happens in the micro moment of friction, when the biological impulse to react with blind, unregulated force surges up.
When the steam pressure spikes.
The apprentice must possess the fortitude to stop, aggressively apply the 24-inch rule to their own mind, and deliberately choose the highly disciplined, measured action instead.
It requires a relentless, almost exhausting level of vigilance.
It really does. You know, when we pull back and view the entirety of Chapter 1 from a high vantage point, we have basically traced the fundamental blueprint of human maturation.
We really have. We begin with the terrifying realization that our own internal emotions and passions are volatile, explosive forces that must be contained.
We learn that we must deploy our intellect not just as a passive observer, but as a navigational compass to prevent us from incinerating ourselves and our surroundings.
And then we are handed the physical mechanisms of change, the immense kinetic power of the gavel, and the rigid, absolute discipline of the rule.
We utilize those combined tools to initiate the slow, deeply humbling, incredibly dusty work of striking the jagged edges off our own rough ashlar.
And we do this with the profound understanding that as we subject ourselves to this discipline, as we make ourselves capable of bearing weight,
we are simultaneously contributing to the structural integrity of a society desperately trying to balance liberty, equality, and fraternity without collapsing.
Exactly. We accept the heavy burden that our thoughts and our will are literal physical forces in this world.
And that we must actively, aggressively combat the natural entropy of error by cultivating and defending the complex structure of truth.
And finally, we transmute all of this abstract theory into a lived physical reality by operating our lives through the mechanisms of justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude.
It is an incredibly dense, demanding foundation.
It is. And the text is explicitly clear that this is merely the entry point.
Right, because this is just chapter 1.
Exactly. The conceptual journey continues in subsequent chapters as the apprentice eventually advances to the stage of the philocraft.
Where the philosophical demands increase, the tools become exponentially more complex, and the rigorous search for truth expands into entirely new dimensions.
The architecture only gets more intricate from here.
It really does. But before we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with a new angle to consider.
Something that builds on this historical framework but applies directly to the modern moment you are living in right now.
Because, based on the blueprint we've analyzed today, consider the technological reality of the modern world.
Think about it. If an unrefined individual is a rough Ashlar, and force without measurement is inherently destructive.
What happens when a society completely discards the 24-inch rule, but uses digital technology and social media to artificially multiply the striking power of the individual gavel by 1 billion?
We have handed every single person on Earth an incredibly massive hammer that can strike across the globe instantaneously.
But we have stripped away the cultural expectation of discipline, restraint, and measurement.
Are we currently living inside the exact, unregulated, hyper-destructive thermodynamic explosion that Pike warned about over a century ago?
Are we a society of maximized gavels and completely discarded rules?
It's crazy to think about.
It is, and that is the question you have to answer for yourself. Human nature is infinitely complex. There is no simple diagnostic X-ray, and there is no effortless cure.
But you understand the tools now.
You do. The internal work of the apprentice is deeply, unavoidably personal, and the quarry is waiting.
So pick up the tools.
So keep your intellectual compass rigidly calibrated, maintain a white-knuckle grip on your 24-inch rule, and keep striking the stone. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.